the scream came before the sunrise. It tore through the brittle dawn like a hawk through glass, echoing across the canyon until even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Dust lifted in slow spirals outside the adobe home, where a woman in a faded green dress fell to her knees, her palms pressed into the earth as if begging it to give back what it had taken. Her sons were gone. The trail behind the house was carved with small footprints leading toward the desert's edge, then vanishing into windswept nothing. She searched until her breath broke, calling their names until her voice cracked like old leather. The silence that answered her was cruelly familiar. She had heard it once before, when fever took her husband, when the men who spoke in papers and promises took her land. Now it came again, hollow and final, like a verdict. For 3 days she wandered between hope and madness. The sun seared her back, the sand stole her footprints, and each night she wrapped herself in a blanket that smelled faintly of her children's hair. The townsfolk saw her pass the well but looked away, pretending not to see the desperation in her eyes. Some whispered that wild dogs had found the boys. Others said raiders. The sheriff shrugged. Search parties cost time and bullets. By the 3rd day, she stopped asking. There was nothing left in her voice but dust. She was a woman of silence before all this, but now her quiet became something else. Stone-hard, endless. Her name was whispered as a warning by travelers who stopped for water, the widow who lost her sons to the desert. Her hair hung loose down her back, streaked with dust, her turquoise jewelry dimmed with sweat and grief. She carried their moccasins tied to her waist by a strip of cloth, as if the weight might keep her anchored to the living. Each night she watched the horizon until stars appeared, and each time she closed her eyes, she imagined small hands reaching for hers from the dark. The morning he arrived, the air itself seemed to change. The wind eased, the sky felt closer, and for a moment the widow forgot to breathe. A rider emerged from the far ridge, a lone figure wrapped in the glow of sunrise. His horse was lean, its hide the color of river mud, and dust clung to his vest like old sins. He moved with the patience of a man who had been alone too long. When he dismounted by the well, she watched him from a distance, one hand resting on the post, the other hovering near her chest, where the ache lived. He asked for water in a voice that sounded worn but steady. She nodded toward the bucket. He drank, wiped his mouth, and looked at her for the first time. Not like the others had, not with pity or caution, but as though he was remembering something he'd lost too. His gaze lingered on the moccasins hanging by her hip. His expression changed, a flicker, small but sure. He said he had seen 2 boys north of the canyon, barefoot, frightened, hiding behind a fallen tree. They'd refused to speak but clung to each other like they were the only thing left in the world. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She stepped forward, the ground trembling beneath her bare feet. The air between them thickened. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath. Where? He told her. The words struck her chest like thunder. Before he could ask her to wait, she stumbled toward her horse, but her knees gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground. For a heartbeat she let herself lean into his arm, the scent of dust and leather filling her lungs. Then she pulled away, shaking, whispering for him to go. He nodded once, no promise, no oath, just quiet certainty. He rode before dawn, the horizon swallowing him whole. Hours stretched into an eternity. The widow stood outside her home, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the far ridge where the desert met the sky. The wind carried whispers that weren't words, only prayers. When the sun finally dipped, a faint shape appeared, then another. Her breath stopped. The rider came slowly into view, the boys slumped against his chest, asleep, small hands tangled in his shirt. She ran. The scream that broke from her was no longer pain, it was life clawing its way back. She fell to her knees before them, gathering the boys, kissing their faces, their dirt, their tears. Her heart beat like a drum against the earth. The cowboy stood behind her, hat in hand, his face unreadable in the fading light. When she lifted her eyes to thank him, he turned to leave. She called out, not his name, just a single word that trembled in the air between them. Stay. The storm came without warning. One moment, the sky was a pale wash of evening blue, and the next it split open, hurling rain like shards of glass. The widow pushed her sons inside the small adobe home as thunder rolled over the hills. The cowboy was already there, trying to seal the window shutters against the wind, his shirt soaked and clinging to him. The world outside turned white with lightning. The boys clung to their mother's dress, eyes wide as the thunder cracked again, shaking the walls. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the earth itself might tear apart, and in that chaos she realized how much she had come to rely on the man who stood between her and the wild. He had stayed after bringing her sons home, though neither spoke of why. He said the storm season made travel dangerous, but she knew better. Some things didn't need words. The desert could keep its secrets, she had learned to live with silence. Yet since his arrival, that silence felt less like an empty room and more like a pause between heartbeats. He worked the fence lines, repaired the roof, shared stories in a voice soft as ash. The boys followed him everywhere, mimicking his every move, calling him the man who could find lost things. At night, when the fire dimmed, she sometimes caught him watching them, her sons, his face gentled by something she didn't dare name. The storm grew wilder. Rain hammered the roof until dust turned to mud beneath the door. The widow tried to move a water pot from the floor, but her foot slipped, sending her sprawling. The cowboy was there in an instant, catching her arm. Their faces were close, too close, and for a second the thunder seemed far away. She felt his breath, smelled the desert rain on his skin. Her heart stumbled in her chest, unsure whether to flee or stay. He let go first, his gaze lowering, the faintest tremor in his voice when he told her to take the boys to the back room. A crash answered him, a branch slamming through the sidewall, splintering wood and throwing sparks from the dying fire. The boys screamed. He rushed forward, pulling them clear of the falling debris, his body shielding theirs as the wall cracked open to the storm. Lightning split the sky again, and for an instant everything froze in white light, the widow kneeling in the mud, the cowboy crouched protectively over her sons, his hat gone, blood trickling from his brow. The world went black again, filled only with the sound of rain and ragged breathing. When the worst of it passed, the widow found herself holding his face in her hands. His eyes fluttered open, dazed but steady, and she felt something rise within her, a wave too deep for words. Gratitude, fear, love, all tangled into one ache that had waited years to be named. She wanted to thank him, but her voice broke halfway. He only smiled, tired and small, as if to say he already knew. Then he fainted. Morning came slow and gold, heavy with the scent of wet earth. The storm had stripped branches bare, torn fences, and left silence heavy in the valley. The boys slept against her side, safe. The cowboy lay on a cot near the fire, his wound cleaned, his breath shallow but even. She watched him, tracing the line of his jaw with her eyes, thinking how strange it was that a stranger could feel like belonging. When he finally stirred, she offered him water. He thanked her softly, his gaze lingering on her sons before meeting hers. He told her then, in the quiet that followed, that he had once lost a family too, a wife and daughter, taken by fever on the trail north. Since then he had wandered from town to town, helping others only to forget himself. She listened, her hand resting near his, close enough to feel the warmth but not the touch. Her voice was steady when she said loss never truly leaves, it just teaches you how to carry it. His eyes glistened, and for the first time in years, he looked like a man forgiven. Days passed, and the house began to hum again with life. He stayed longer each morning, fixed what storms had broken, laughed with her sons until they forgot fear. The widow caught herself smiling more, humming old songs she thought she'd forgotten. But with each dawn came the knowing, he would have to leave. His horse waited saddled near the fence, and his eyes lingered on the horizon more often now. That evening, as the sun bled into the rocks, she found him there, staring west. The boys slept inside. She walked to him quietly, her green dress brushing against the dust. He said he would ride out at first light. She nodded, though her throat burned. He looked down, searching her face for something unspoken. Then he reached for her hand, held it for one long, trembling heartbeat, and let go. The wind carried no sound but the rustle of dry grass. She whispered one word, almost lost in the dusk, "Stay," and the silence that followed felt like the desert itself had stopped breathing.